overfed civil servants that are among the best compensated in the world relative to the GDP per capita of the rest of the population. So it remains to be seen what's going on. Okay. So one of the other things that is worth bearing in mind, is quite important, is that municipalities are going to be intensifying enforcement against zoning violations, but there's a very specific provision over here. What they've done is they've decided to make it enforceable retroactively and to decouple rates from property valuations. So now rates and taxes for municipalities are entirely arbitrary. I suspect part of the reason for this is the enormous presence of illegal settlements. And the problem with this is that you have this big section of the population whose water and electricity has to be subsidized by ratepayers because they're just not going to pay their bills. And they're going to get illegal connections. And they don't pay rates and taxes themselves, and so all of their services have to be covered by ratepayers. This is egregious, but at the same time, municipalities just they're unsustainable in the present mode, and the way that the DA has been coping with this is they've been adding a whole bunch of arbitrary surcharges on top of everything wherever they govern. And these are being challenged in the court at the moment, particularly for Cape Town, where you've got pretty much everyone who has the right to represent any ratepayer anywhere in the city is suing the city at the moment. It's a huge lawsuit, but as a result of these revenue grabs, the city has posted its first surplus. For many, many years, they've been posting deficits of several billion where they write off huge amounts of revenue due to spending on, free services for land invaders. But now they seem to be balancing the books. But I suspect there's going to come a point where a lot of people are going to say, like, it's worth risking it not paying rates and taxes because you just don't. It'll get unaffordable for a lot of people. It's already very hard to afford rent in many places, not just in Cape Town, but increasingly outside of it. I mean, renting a place, even out here in the sticks, it's getting up to sort of 8K, 10K for sort of anywhere that's reasonably nice. So I think this is going to be a bit of a problem because I can't see any way that they're going to be able to bring these rates down, and at the same time, I don't see them dealing with this. I mean, again, this is one of those problems where you kind of go, well, it'd be sold if we could secede, but what else? Hello, David. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks.
We had some very nasty technical difficulties starting this stream. So I I had to actually stop streaming and start again because for some reason the computer decided that something else was using my microphone and camera when nothing was. Yeah, go figure. YouTube, Chrome, don't. Complaints are endless. But yeah, such is life. So I just went over the the closure of the clinic in Stellenbosch and the increase in the premier's salary and the zoning contraventions. So I mean this one, I mean you've checked in on this one. It seems to be a little bit sort of worrying because it seems almost to me like the court has handed municipalities an almost arbitrary remit to extract whatever they want. And I'm not sure if that's the case, but if it's no longer attached to property valuations, what means are they even using? Do you know what I mean? It's like, what's going to go on there? I mean, I think we'd have to consult with a legal expert to understand that properly, but it is a little bit worrying. in a lot of ways. Because we've already seen all of those rates increases in Cape Town, where they add those little sort of service fees, those flat rates on top of everything. It's getting strenuous. But yeah, what I'm going to say as well, in connection to sort of Feroz Kachalia's reason, sort of earlier on I called him Khaled Kachalia, who's a completely different person. The Police Minister Feroz Kachalia. So the thing is, after he sort of said he can't do anything about the gangs, so Alan Windy's now doing this thing of saying, well, let's see if we can elevate the Cape Flats gang violence to an emergency status. And there's statements from President Ramaphosa concerning like, oh, he's mulling over sending the military down. I have this sort of vague recollection that about a year before we did COVID lockdowns, we had military deployments on the Cape Flats to sort of get people used to it. Okay, that's a bit conspiratorial of me. I should probably sort of pump my brakes a little bit, but I always worry about this kind of thing because, in a sense, there's a sense in which the military is kind of popular because people are desperate for some kind of authoritarian response to what is a regime of utter, complete terror most of the time. And but at the same time, you don't actually see a great deal of change when they are deployed. So I'm not really sure what Alan Windy is hoping to get out of this. Maybe a little bit of emergency funding, but it's unclear to me how this is going to solve the broader issues. I mean, again, we're looking at these situations where you've got like begging for devolution of policing powers from the city of Cape Town and so on. But at the same time, it takes them being reminded by the Vryheidsfront and by online commentators that, oh yeah, they have LEAP officers, they can deploy them to the N2 to keep people from stoning cars. But no, they want to build a wall. I mean, how are they going to stop people from stealing the wall? I know that sounds like a stupid thing if you're a foreigner and you're listening to this and it's like, yeah, but the wall works. No, unless you have one of those, I don't even think one of those giant sort of Israeli style dividing, poured concrete dividing walls would work. I think within a month or two, they're going to be picking these slabs up and using them for foundations for,
We did a few articles on it a while back when it was first brought up, and I think I made a video about it. And I always enjoy reading people's comments. I love comments because very often people just say very interesting things. And a lot of people were saying, but what's the point? Because the wall's just going to get stolen. So that is what the person, that is how the person on the street understands this, is that this is a really stupid idea because it's just going to get stolen.
Jeepers. Yeah, no, I mean, there's a similar sort of problem that they have with both water and fire, and those come a bit later because I've got sort of longer notes on this. But just briefly, the broad strokes of this is, one of the big drivers of fires is not illegal, sort of invasive alien species like black wattle and all of that stuff, and sort of pine plantations where the pine trees propagate outside of the boundaries and so on. And, these are highly combustible plants that reproduce with the fire much more rapidly than our native species do. And they burn with 8 times the intensity, and they consume 30% more water. And it's, and the amount of money that's sort of forked down to actually... Sorry?
You did that. You actually did that really excellent article about it. A lot of people.
Yeah, I think that was about 2 weeks ago. I did an article where I sort of went into some of the academic literature, and I sort of looked at, okay, well, when did this become a problem? What's the sort of natural burn pattern that the native flora have adapted to? All of that kind of stuff. And one of the things that strikes me is just how little money is forked out to the few little NGOs and quangos. Just to distinguish the two, an NGO is a non-governmental organization. A quango is a quasi non-governmental organization. So, for example, Cape Nature. Cape Nature is, strictly speaking, a non-governmental organization, but they reserve places on their board for provincial government officials. So, Anton Bradell will sit on the board and so on. So you've got these really sort of disproportionate, sort of like cockeyed responses where, they're angling for, tens of millions of rands in emergency funding every fire season, but they don't fork out nearly that much on stocking up their fire services with equipment or clearing alien vegetation, which would drastically reduce the impact of fire season, which is every year. So, and the same goes for the water crisis, which I'll get into a bit later. But it's I just think that there's this very sort of whack-a-mole response from the DA, where instead of focusing on dealing with the problem, they try and kick the can down the road, even on like the level of single year problems. Everything is like this. There's no approach to tackling the root causes of any crisis, like whether it's land invasions, fires, water. I mean, everything is dealt with this way. It's bananas. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, it's like, okay, the DA are better than the ANC in many respects, but it's like, I get this feeling that they're not. I mean, where do I go with this? Corruption, I mean, and you'll see this again. This is the same thing. I'm getting people messaging me, and I don't have time to deal with to investigate this properly. But Stellenbosch, we did a piece at the end of last year about Stellenbosch. They had managers and councillors who were openly discriminating against white staff and pushing them out and so on. And there's disciplinary hearings and so on. The people are still there, and they've pushed out 3 more white technical employees from the municipality since. There is no accountability in the DA, no matter what happens. It's just, and whether you're looking at Knysna or B2 or actually anything in the Garden Route, extremely crooked little borough that, and Drakensberg and Stellenbosch trade managers and mayors. And I've seen people getting kicked down from Midvaal to Langeberg to Hessequa who have marks against their name. It's extraordinary. The only people that the DA ever do anything against are, on the one hand, whistleblowers, and on the other hand, people that the police have already arrested, like Malusi Boy. So I mean, there's just no willpower to do anything meaningful. It's just make sure that the accountants are doing their job. We get a clean audit, and regardless of whether the money is wasted or not, or whether it's going to the wrong place, if there's receipts for it, all's well and good. Which just it's galling, really, because sorry, this rant is going on for too long.
No, I mean, if I could just on that point. So if you look at what's happened in the Overstrand municipality, there's a lady there called Annalie Rabi. She was the mayor of the Overstrand from 2021 until the mid of last year, until she left. But if you look at her history, it's quite interesting. Back in 2011, she was working for the Cape Business something or other. Anyway,
Chamber?
I forget the name. I did a whole bunch of pieces on her a while back, but she was working for some Cape business organization, and it was found out that she had run up a business credit card with them of 35,000 rand. So people did investigations, and she said, "Oh no, I didn't know it was the business credit card. I thought it was my credit card." That's literally what she said. Uh, so then she then leaves, and she then ends up in the Karoo. She ended up involved with what was the area they called, and then she was basically moved on towards one of those municipalities down there, and she got involved with the caucus again. She moved up the ranks, and then the DA formed a coalition with a party there, and then in 2020 it didn't work out very well. So then she then suddenly popped up in the Overstrand and became mayor in 2021. So now she's back in it, and there are allegations that there's allegations that a docket was lodged at the police station somewhere near Hermanus that involves 25 million rand in a fuel contract. Now, there are numerous sources have told me this, but I have to say it's alleged that in some way or another she is connected to this amount. So, but it's so interesting because you see that same pattern of someone is involved with something, slightly questionable, and then they'll get moved over to another municipality, and then they suddenly pop up somewhere else. But there is very little actual accountability, and with her, it's a pattern. It's 2011 it happened, and then and people that and
Well, I mean, it could be worse. It could be worse. I mean, I can name 3 people off the top of my head who were caught doing something that they shouldn't have, and because the scandal was big enough, they couldn't keep them on, so they promoted them to Parliament, and that's Eleanor Bospies, Conrad Puel, and what's that bugger's name? Memory Boyson. I always keep confusing him with Malusi Boy. They're completely different characters, but it's that boy in their name, and it gets me my wires crossed. But Memory Boyson,
Yes.
I mean, and the thing is, that whole Garden Route area, when they won in 2011, they carried over ANC members as mayoral candidates. So Memory Boyson was with the ANC, and Eleanor Bospies was the ANC mayor of Knysna and was made the DA mayor of Knysna immediately afterwards. And another story that is going to come up on just down here is
I mean, it's so clear that the DA
Mbulelo Memani. He was one of the people who, under Memory Boyson, was getting paid millions rands above what he's illegally allowed to receive. And there were 2 others, Monde Stratu, and I think that was his name. I can't remember the third character. Once I've done my sort of investigative pieces, I tend to shelve them a little bit. But so the 3 of them, they were getting compensated, and the DA kept them on for more than a decade. And even after the Hawks charge him, and there's a court case going on, and so on, he's now been brought back under the ANC-led coalition over there, and it's just like, it never ends. It never ends. You never get rid of these parasites. Sorry, not Knysna, B2. Don't let me confuse them. Garden Route, Plettenberg, and Knysna, different places.
Dude, it's so interesting. It's so interesting that you call them a parasite, because I've been chatting to this local councillor here in the city of Cape Town. I can't mention his name, but he's involved with quite a high-profile case that he's been pioneering. Now, he's not part of the DA, but he says that because he's been starting to get traction with the community, and the community are enjoying his work, he said that they've literally come at him. They literally come at him and try get him to come over onto their side and try and get involved with what he's doing. Because then what they'll do is afterwards they'll spin a PR campaign. Oh, look what the DA have done. But it was not
interesting.
It was someone from another movement that is actually doing the hard work, and then the parasites come on and just feed off it.
But yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting you say that, but I've been digging back into Neisner's ancient history recently. So there's a character that people in Neisner will know about, who's called Mike Hampton. And Mike Hampton was, he was like a small-time music reviewer, sort of gig manager guy. He did like a little bit of local tourism promotion and stuff, like nothing major or anything. And very sort of middle-of-the-road liberal kind of guy. And he had this sort of very stupid run-in with a company called Neisner Tourism, which is now the Neisner, something like the Chamber of Tourism or a Chamber of Commerce or something. I can't remember what they renamed themselves to now. And a lot of the people who were involved with the shenanigans at the time have now gone on to work for Westgrow. So the tangled webs over here, and apparently Alan Winde needed Eleanor Bospice's support to get his premiership candidacy when he started out. So it's there's a whole thing going on there. But when Mike Hampton was part of it, he tried to get like a little gig organized at a local event. And the problem with this is he just wanted to like design his own posters because it was cheaper. Because like you're working at the low end of the market in the music industry, you want to save every penny you can. But Neisner Tourism was gatekept all of the locations, and said, well, you're not allowed to use your own. You're not allowed to design your own posters. You have to use this really shitty graphic designer that we selected for you. And he thought, okay, this is stupid and outrageous and irritating and whatever. So he starts looking into Neisner Tourism. And it turns out that without issuing a tender, the government is giving grant and aid to an indebted NGO on which family and members of the DA are sitting as board members. And they get carried away. A lot of them, they start issuing threats. They threaten businesses that allow him to like come there as a customer, all kinds of crazy stuff. They got, there's a member of the DA called Dr. something Young. I can't remember what his first name is, Martin Young, I think. And he issues, he's an ear, nose, and throat specialist. And he never sat down with Mike Hampton, but he wrote up a diagnosis of him as a kind of delusional psychopath, as if he was some professional psychiatrist in a clinical setting. And this was accepted by the court that eventually banned him from criticizing Esme Edge and Julius Seaton. When I spoke to him, he was so terrified of legal consequences that he wouldn't even tell me who the gag was against. So, like, I had to go and Google old articles in, the Neisner Plate Herald and all things like that. And there's a Hawks report on everything. Most of the things that he said about the financial malfeasance was true, but he couldn't prove most of the persecution stuff that happened, and some of it was insane. I mean, you had council members who'd started 3 different websites to slander him. And they were posting accusations on Facebook that he was raping and murdering young children from the township. It was like on a level that I thought, it was Kafkaesque beyond belief. And this is the DA. And all of these people are now still working, either for the DA or for Action SA. They're just, it's just absolute, like the moral decrepitude of these people is beyond belief. There's just no level you can justify this on. And the worst part is that Helen Zille was intimately involved with this whole process. She knew what was going on, right? Nobody has been punished for this, but the party made it a priority to take care of Mike Hampton. Look, the problem with Mike Hampton is he's a very scatterbrained individual. So he made a lot of claims, which, okay, you can see that some of them are plausible. But he didn't realize he didn't realize exactly how high the standard of evidence was to make claims about people in public, and so he said things that he couldn't prove. and this got him into enormous trouble. He's not doing very well, I have to say. But these things have to be borne in mind, because the same people are still in charge of the party. The same people are still in charge of local structures. It's very, very nasty stuff. I don't know what to say. Because look now where we are. We're talking about a massive water crisis in Knysna. We're getting to the point where so this term Day Zero was actually created by a PR manager for the DA called Nick Cleland. Now, Nick Cleland and what's his name, Ryan Coetzee, they were like part of the very young talent corps that was recruited in the early 90s, and they sort of hung on in the orbit of the party, and Ryan Coetzee was involved in negotiations for the GNU. Nick Cleland was brought back to help design the propaganda campaigns for Day Zero in Cape Town, which is very well run, very good, actually necessary. It's a pity that the water rates never went down after the crisis, but such is life. He's clearly a very talented individual, and if you can find, if you know where to look, you can find online the two of them wrote a book covering the DA's PR strategy and how they deal with the media, social media, press releases, how to manage that. So their whole playbook is available. But Nick Cleland, his idea is still in operation. So the definition of Day Zero is you run out of tap water supply, and you have to now sort of deliver emergency water in tankers. And so that's what's coming for Knysna if they can't really fix it immediately. But the problem is, like, they recognized, even when the ANC was in charge of Knysna, it was recognized that they had to deal with the problem. So this is Eleanor Bose-Spies, when she was mayor in 2009, initiated a policy for building a desalination plant. And this was kicked down the road. And when she was in charge under the DA, nothing was done about this either. There were no new lines from dams, no new dams built, no desalination plants built. So this is something that the DA are fully responsible for. Okay, not 100%, because look, the ANC has been in charge the last few years because it's a hung council. They've allowed too much illegal settlement to maintain the demographics required to keep their electoral majority. But it remains the case that the DA had the opportunity to shore up the infrastructure, and they absolutely refused to, for various reasons. Now, some of it's due to NIMBYs in their own backyard saying, oh, we don't want this, we don't want that. And yeah, I can understand that's a bit of an irritating option. But the DA have shoved through planning before in many cases. Over here in Drakenstein, we fought for 10 years to prevent them from building a waste-to-energy plant. And in order to make sure that there was enough waste to burn, because there isn't actually for a regular supply, they actually stopped building landfill sites, and they screwed with the regulations around what waste you can chuck in the landfill. So now they can't get enough rubble to cover the landfill up. So now every now and again you get a whiff of landfill from like kilometers away. And it's like you've got fly tipping that costs them tens of millions of rands to clean up in every year's budget, because they've made it difficult to throw away garbage. I mean, and the thing is, then they had this sort of very, very Fong Kong environmental impact assessment done for 20 million rand, which was torn apart rapidly by a buchu farmer, a local buchu farmer who was sitting on the waste committee. And like when they finally sort of ran up against proper sort of resistance from the local community, they reached out to Barbara Creasy in the national government for a grant. And the sticker price for this project is now 1.2 billion rand. But the UCT published a paper back in years ago now, where they actually quoted the supplier, the tender applicant, for how much it would cost, and it's 200 million. So they've inflated the price by 6 times somehow. I don't even know where to begin with this. It's like, it's just, they can shove things through if they need to. They got the Amazon warehouse built, where even though it violated planning laws and everything like that. They can get this done. So why couldn't they get it done for the water in Knysna? I don't know. I don't bloody know. So it's like the only people who are really going to be impacted by this are like, people who live there. Yuck. So, who cares? But they're absolutely just like, they'll go tooth and nail for something if a donor or a business partner is involved. It drives me bananas.
Yeah, there's a area down here where I stay called Capri. It's a little suburb here near to Fisher. And there's a small little piece of fynbos. It's known as the Capri Common. It's a nice little area. It's not very big. It's quite small. And but it's got a really rare fynbos, and it's a lovely piece of ecological significance. Anyways, someone is now trying to build a 32 unit development on this piece of land, and that's very high density for that area because it's very small. 32, it's massive, and it's totally going to ruin the whole thing. And there's a lot of, it appears, it's alleged, there's all sorts of shenanigans going on, and the local ratepayers here are trying to fight it. But I support them, and I've tried to make a fuss. But when there's money involved and money's being passed around.
But you're making me think of Stellenbosch now, because the Botmas Corp.
It's greed. It is immoral. It is wicked. It is greed, and we need to give these people a snort clap. I'm sorry, because it's just greed. They are so greedy, and they need to fall. Somebody has to bring them down, because it's so wrong what they're doing. It's just wrong.
I have I have this very big sort of like spooky voice in the back of my head that worries that if they go under a majority, they'll just bring the ANC into government. The thing is,
so just on that, because I've dialogued a lot with people on that. People say that to me, and I say to them, well, voting for the DA is going to get you the ANC anyways. So either way,
that's true,
because they are so aligned with them. Willem Petzer did a video about how Helen Zille is excellent at implementing ANC policy. He did something about it. People can go watch it. So if you don't vote for the DA, you'll get the ANC. If you do vote for the DA, you're going to get the ANC. So either way, we have to exit to go somewhere else.
Yeah, no, I mean, but look, on the plus side, when you look at the local by-elections, the DA are taking a hit, and my sort of wonder, because I wish I could be a fly on the wall inside the Exco, because I'm wondering how they're rationalizing their recent by-election losses. Because in Pretoria, you had a massive result for Vryheidsfront Plus.
28% increase, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the turnout was 41% of the turnout in the previous election. So there has to be some accommodation for that. But the DA usually does pretty well, even in by-elections. And this one, they kind of squeaked by. They lost an enormous lead. And you got to remember, I mean, look, the results for all of those Pretoria areas in the 2024 election, the Vryheidsfront Plus took a massive knock. And look, my intuition at the time is, the DA were very, very good at canvassing the public and getting them to understand that, all of us opposition parties are together against the ANC. I mean, look, it was a big rug pull. It was a fraudulent campaign because they've been planning to go into coalition with the ANC as early as 2012. And the I mean, look, this is not like speculation. This is on paper. This is a written interview with Helen Zille with Chatham House from 2012, where she says that she wants to go into government with Jacob Zuma and help him implement the National Development Plan because they think that the ANC's got what it takes. And then the next year, she gets the party to vote for the BEE Amendment Act and the Employment Equity Amendment Act, and starts talking about how land reform needs to be accelerated and there's a good BEE.
We've
and
actually
all
got
of
a copy of it on the website. So if people want to go read what Rob's actually talking about, go to the website. We've actually got it there, the actual document.
Yeah, and so there's this whole picture where sort of, for a long time before the deal was actually struck, it was there were vociferous denials that there was even thinking about joining the ANC in government. But right up until a week before the election, they were taking Sunday World to the ombudsman for saying this kind of stuff. So, but the multi-party coalition, the MPC, also known as the Moonshot Pact.
Do you remember that thing?
Yeah, I wrote a whole article on it where I called it a stalking horse. And I mean, look, Herman Mashaba was incensed when they finally sort of inked that deal with the ANC. And I thought, you poor bugger, because they shafted him again in Tshwane when Helen Zille tried to get a backdoor deal with the ANC where they would give them confidence in supplying Ekurhuleni so they could govern alone without the EFF, and then the ANC would give them confidence in supply in Ekurhuleni, in Tshwane, so that they could govern without all of the smaller parties. And I mean, she's got this whole proposal, electoral amendment proposal, for eradicating the small parties from the ballot, so that it's only those parties who back the ANC's plan who can actually get a seat in parliament. I mean, this kind of insane behavior. But I mean, remember, her position back in the 90s, and you can pick this up from interviews with her, is that she really loved and supported the ANC, but when she went to go work with them, they were all stupid. So she decided, well, I'm going to go and work for the DP, the DA, whatever it's called, and push the ANC's cause through that channel. So, and she has the sort of position that, free market, you can have a private sector or whatever, but free markets are for the birds. And what you really want is a planned economy that stretches 60 years into the future, planning for a future economic and technological development. And then, everything has to be handled by foreign non-governmental agencies. And you can vote for other parties, that's great, but we don't want to have people who change the philosophy or ideology of the state. That would be terrible. So her idea is sort of a system where you have global governance that controls every aspect of your life, except your ability to take drugs, have sex with who you like, and say what you like online as long as the government approves of it. And it's like the most... she's actually extraordinarily totalitarian. She's found she justifies a lot of these sort of new right intellectuals who say that liberalism is a gateway to communism, because what she's done is she's deliberately selected a liberal path towards centralized socialist control. It's I don't know what to say. It's because if you spend enough time listening to these characters, their perspective on these things becomes quite clear, and it's depressing, because now we're looking at a situation where, okay, John Steenhuisen has lost his credentials and his credibility in public, but Jordan Hill Lewis has been waiting in the wings for a couple of years now. I remember when I started out this paper with Vian Hutting, and now Vian Hutting was a bit of a character, to put it mildly, but he had an extraordinarily good ear for, inside gossip. And one of the things he was saying to me more than 2 years ago was that the DA, particularly Helen Zille and people who have contact with News 24, were trying to line up Jordan Hill Lewis to succeed John Steenhuisen, and they were looking to sabotage his reputation in the media. Now, Jordan Hill Lewis, of course, has his PR agent, according to Vienna Hutting when he was alive, because the two of them were friends. They, ran in the same social circles. Her name, I think it's Sarita Engelbrecht. Now, he told me, and I don't, again, you don't know how much to believe, really, but he said that she was actually an EFF supporter, which kind of like, okay. But she works sort of in the city administration, but she used to work for Media 24. And so her contacts with the media allow her to put these extremely sweet sort of puff pieces in. And you'll notice every now and again, I mean, regardless of which member of his administration was responsible for putting whatever thing was together, it'll always be Jordan Hill Lewis taking the credit for everything, if it's good, and then, oh no, it's someone else's fault if it's bad. So he didn't get a lot of shtick. But if you pay attention to the good party, now I don't like the good party; they're a bunch of silly sausages. But Brett Herron, though, I don't think there's anyone in the Cape who pays closer attention to local goings on than him. And so, regardless of whether you share his views or not, this is a guy who clearly gives a damn and has a good ear to the ground. So I've picked up a lot of stuff about Jordan Hill Lewis's slip-ups and his misbehavior from just following what Brett Herron points out. And one of the things that came out was, like him abusing his authority in order to settle a neighborhood dispute between his mother-in-law and someone who was repairing cars on her block and annoying her with the noise. That's, that's if I remember correctly, anyway. So, like the madness that you get coming out of this stuff. I had the one that sticks in my memory was Fadil Adams. Now, Fadil Adams is another one of those guys like Mike Hampton who doesn't practice good. The term I like to use, but it's a bit wanky, but because after all, I did analytical philosophy at undergrad, so I you naturally learn to invent terms like this for your own sort of edification. But epistemic hygiene. So he doesn't sort of note exactly to what degree of certainty he knows A, B, or C. But there are things that he will hear and things he'll come up with which seem outlandish until you actually check in on them. And one of the things that he was doing since 2019 was he was saying, okay, well, the city has this illegal tender contract with a front company for the 28s gang, and they're building houses. And it's like, okay, but I don't know. What is Fadil really saying? Does he really know? But it turns out we have 4 years later, you have SAPS raiding Malusi Boy's office, and then, oh my God, I didn't know. Which is utter bullshit, because it was brought to the city's attention. It was brought to SAPS's attention. It was brought to the public prosecutor's attention. I mean, this stuff was out there, and the DA did absolutely bugger all about it, and they got caught with their pants down. So, and my sort of worry is that Jordan Hill Lewis, who spends all of his public communication, is spent boasting about the fact that they're spending most of the city's budget on servicing people who are effectively land invaders, and it's free utilities for people who they just sort of write off their rates and their debts en masse to the tune of millions and millions and millions. And I have this intuition that if he becomes head of the DA, because he's smarter and he's more self-controlled than John Steenhuisen, I suspect that he is going to do quite well, and then he's going to be quite popular with a lot of white people, because he gives them that fuzzy Father Christmas feeling. And it's not that, look, it might do bad for them amongst non-white constituencies, because as well run as Cape Town is relative to the rest of the country, the prevailing perspective that most people, despite the enormity of Parliament and the generosity of their welfare program and free services, the prevailing impression black people have is that the DA only service white areas. And I can see why that's the case, because their way of coping with land invasions has created a land invasion problem that dwarfs that of any other part of the country. And so they've made it impossible to actually fix the land problem, right? So they can't actually build houses fast enough. And the result is that the vast majority of people coming to the province are now living in these vast squatter camps, which are filthy and dangerous and undignified. And the legacy residents are not being shouldered out by these people, they're being shouldered out by foreigners. And so what you see is, areas of absolute squalor and areas of relative affluence, clean streets, good service delivery. And so the perspective from below is, paradoxically, despite all of the left-wing policies, is that the DA is only for white people. And that's not going to help them.
Can I add a perspective in there? And this is something I've actually thought for a very long time, but it's so difficult to actually prove with data. But I have friends that work in the Cape Town city. They work for the municipality, and they're very competent people. But they're not aligned to the DA at all. In fact, they would probably vote for the ACDP or the Freedom Front Plus. But they're very competent, but they're not aligned to the DA. And I have this theory that the DA take credit for other people's good work, and then they brag about it, right? And because they're like a virus, when someone's doing a good job, they'll latch onto it and then brag about it. And so they've done such a good job in bragging, and their PR is so excellent that everyone thinks that the DA are competent and that they know what they're doing. But I don't think that is actually the case. I think that what's actually the case is that they are just hardworking, competent people that work in the municipality and they do a bloody good job. And that the DA,
but it's like correlation and causation. But it's correlation and causation, isn't it? Because what you have is, sorry, go on.
I think genuinely, and as I've made it very clear, I voted for the DA for 15 years. I was even on a local council here. So I'm not anti-DA because I'm trying to be a contrarian. I genuinely do think that they actually make it worse, and that they actually are holding a lot of municipalities back. And I'm not just saying this because I think it's a good idea. I've seen the repeated patterns of them shuffling people around when there's dodgy things going on, and like, for example, okay, where I lived out here in the deep south, the water pipes under the ground in this whole area of Fish Hook, all the way through to Kalmicki, are so old that they break all the time. And if someone is watching this and they stay down here, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. They are breaking every week. There are water pipe breaks all the time. Now, this has been known for decades, that the water infrastructure is too old. Okay, I chatted to a guy who was the head of the whole water infrastructure for the city. He said to me, these things are so old, and that they're just going to be breaking. And so, but the DA have been running the city for a very long time, and they have not fixed them. And so this whole idea that the DA do a good job, I think it's just that they latch onto when competent people are doing a good job, and then they brag about it, and they just have excellent bragging skills. I genuinely just think it's that. I cannot think of one good thing that the actual DA have actually done. Like, what good thing have they actually ever done? Like, I still want someone to tell me. I've asked people. I've said, make a case for the DA. Chatting with people online, people comment of videos. I regularly say, okay, make a case for the DA, because I currently have this petition going to vote against the DA in 2026, and I make a case for why, and I've made a video, and then someone comments, and I say, okay, make a case for the DA. Do you know no one can make a case for the DA? No one can make a case for the DA because they have no case.
Yeah, I mean, but look, here's the thing. Everyone knows that areas the DA govern are better run than areas the ANC govern. And I mean, anyway, let's
it
ask
just
why.
because they're competent people there?
Of course, well, yes. I mean, this is the thing. Let's look at it in terms of what the fancy people call Human Development Index. So Human Development Index is like, okay, well, how skilled are the general population? How much depth of capital do they have, and things like that, right? And all of the places that vote for the DA are sort of legacy middle class.
Yes. So there's skills, there's competency.
Right. So you've got these areas where the kind of people that are available for employment in your municipality will either come from families where there's a sort of culture of learning and all of that kind of stuff, a culture of institutionalization, should we say, or there's actual talent there, or there's actual sort of, and they don't have to be exceptional. They just have to be people who have some experience, some decent experience, some decent work ethic, basically fine, competent people, right? Not like legendary blow your mind people, but like people who are actually qualified for the job. Okay, I fully comprehend why it's hard for a municipality in the middle of Limpopo to recruit people that can run the local water service and the local accounting and all of this kind of stuff. The decrepitude of those areas actually just makes sense. Like, if they voted for the DA tomorrow, it's unlikely that they would see a drastic improvement in their quality of life, right? I don't know that there are enough people of talent to run this whole government with the amount of sort of stuff that's just attached to every single department at every level. There's just too much stuff going on, right? So the DA sort of soak up the majority of the talent because they don't have other factors as well. Like, I mean, you hear a lot of sort of woke people talk about in South Africa. Not so much in America, but in South Africa, one of the big woke things that was around years ago was this talk about black tax. Now, black tax is actually, you have sure, you have a growing black middle class, but the vast majority of people in anyone's extended family are very poor, and so they're highly reliant on one another for staying afloat. And this means that every single person who is employed in the ANC is trying to support a broader patronage network of their blood relatives. And this means that a lot of people are going to end up cutting corners, or if they're not cutting corners, they at the very least need to earn a fat salary in order to keep themselves socially afloat. And the DA has less of this problem because, well, it's minorities. Minorities tend to be from nuclear families, whether you're colored, Indian, or white, tends to be nuclear families. And so the burden, or forget the nuclear family, just look at the fact that, it's legacy middle class people. So you got all of these sort of structural and economic factors, which mean that any place the DA is likely to be voted for, because people vote along class and race lines in this country, right, is also coincidentally going to be the place that's full of the people that you need to actually run a municipality. And so people confuse the correlation for causation and think, oh, well, if only black people would vote the DA in, then everything would just work out for them. And I sort of think, well, I remember when this was the main argument that I believed, because somehow it didn't occur to me that this was correlation, not causation.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, well, why don't black people vote for them? And now in retrospect, I sort of think, well, it doesn't really matter, does it? Because frankly, I don't want these mukhus in charge. I want someone who's going to, if one of their own members does something illegal, they'll take them to the public prosecutor, kick them out of the party, and, distance themselves from them in public. This is what I would like to see. I'd like to see people who, want to solve the long-term root causes of various crises that are gripping the entire body politic, and instead of trying to have emergency measures all the time. But the DA don't have that in their DNA. That's just not how they do things. And but the funny thing is, when you were talking about them taking credit for other people's work, a thought occurred to me. So now, if you know the long history of the DA, they used to be the DP, and before they were the DP, they were the Progressive Party, and before they were the Progressive Party, they were the United Party, and before they were United Party, they were the South African Party. Now, the South African Party was founded in 1896 here in the Cape by a family of Fabian socialists called the Schreiner family. And the Schreiners, their sort of pitch was how to capture Afrikaner national sentiment and sell unification, or South African unification, to people who were against South African unification. This was their basic sort of model. And right now, again, we've got this whole thing where the same organization is trying to sell the ANC to people who hate the ANC. It's like nothing ever changes with these people. Something very consistent is going on here somehow. And for me, it's that there's a permanent vested interest, this permanent oligarchy that's been running this whole country for 100 odd years through the mining sector. And that interest is rooted in a very, very sort of dumb, brute fact of geography, which is that the mining fields are way interior in the country. And in order to get that stuff out, they have to get it to the ports, which means you need Durban and Cape Town to be in the same country as the Witwatersrand. So it's like, because of that triangle of sort of physical infrastructure, the DA has to now exist so that minorities don't think about breaking rank. It just, like, the cynicism and the pathetic, venal corruption of that very position just absolutely guts me. Because it's like we have this Fong Kong nation that doesn't exist for any other reason than to extract wealth. It was built on a genocide. It was continued by what was effectively slave labor. I mean, if you think about it this way, now a lot of people, in our circles are kind of right-wing, so they don't like this moralizing about colonial history. But from my perspective, it's something that don't get emotional about it. Look at it for what it is. What Smuts did for the mining houses was that he imposed a poll tax on the black population to force them into the city so that he could undercut white labor. And then, as a patch for the social problems that arose for this, they gave them apartheid, knowing from the very beginning that this was a temporary measure. And I look at this, and it's so grim at every single stage. There is nobody who is getting an honest shake out of this. I mean, yes. White people got an enormous amount of privilege out of that system. But the idea that they had in their minds, they lived in a real country that they could entrust to future generations, was from the very get-go a fraud. Even on sort of white supremacist terms, this country was a fraud. And now that you look at the sort of demographic situation today, what are they doing? Well, now it's mass immigration from the rest of Africa and, criminal cartels from China and Pakistan and Somalia.
Yeah.
And nobody's doing a damn thing about it. No one's doing a damn thing about it because, the business cycle needs fresh labor every year, because once people get their roots, they're not interested in grinding themselves to the bone on dumb manual labor. So we need fresh batches of unrooted, insecure laborers, so that we can feed them into the squatter camps forever until the local municipality collapses under the weight of racial voting patterns and unsustainable, rate to welfare ratios. Everything about this stupid bloody country, everything is wrong. There's just no level that you can look at South Africa and think this thing deserves to exist. It's a hideous monstrosity that is just everyone who stakes their future in this is being lied to. I cannot. Every day I think about it, it ruins my day for a good couple of hours. You know, I so I mean, like for me, I think, okay, well, look, what can you do about it? Okay, well, we're Cape secessionists. We believe in an independent Cape.
Sorry. Can I just interject
beyond
there
that,
for a second? So can I just interject there? What are your thoughts then around the growing conflict between like Nigerians and causes and I see there's been stuff happening in Durban at Addington Hospital between Zulus and some like I think they Shona or Ndebele people, but as obviously this completely immoral extractive system you're describing, which I totally agree with. I mean, that's the reality. So what I think about it is pointless. That is the reality. But as they're now pulling in more, you could call it slave labor from the rest of Africa and so forth.
Well, it's not slave labor anymore. It's just international labor arbitrage.
Well, I mean, I call it, yeah. Anyways,
no, the reason I compared the old sort of migrant labor system to slavery was because they're trapped within the borders. They are given an extractive tax, and look, they tried to have a tax revolt, the Bambata Rebellion, and that was crushed violently. And so you have to earn currency. The only way you can earn currency is going to the mines, that's coercive. That is coercive.
Sure, yeah. And I'm speaking a bit of a loose term, but yes, the cheap migrant labor. But obviously, you have more and more Nigerians moving in and so forth. And I've seen on TikTok quite a lot of conflict between those various groups. What's your read on that stuff?
Well, it's partially downstream from the Zulu King's sort of projections here. So he's recently made statements that these people shouldn't be here and so on. And it's one of those things that happens with monarchies, is that monarchies, regardless of what power they have institutionally, they still have this enormous psychological power over the nation. And so what they encourage and what they warn against, and I would encourage anyone to go and read Walter Bagehot, that's Bagehot. And I might even, you know what I'm going to do? Is I recently had a conversation today, that is, with a Zulu traditionalist who let me see if I can find this. A Zulu traditionalist who is going to be writing for us for let me go on this DOI number. So there's a beautiful bit of research this. So when you're looking at monarchies, the power that they wield is this. Let me just do this. Okay, now I'm going to put this on stream. So this is the citation. Right. I'm sorry for the garbled sort of text. I was just copying this through. So Kiyotada Tsutsui, a turning point for the system of emperors symbol, Bagehot, Emperor Showa, and Fukuzawa. So now, Walter Bagehot was the theorist of the British Constitution. Now, the British Constitution isn't codified in one place. So you've got you've got the monarchy, you've got the House of Lords, you've got all of these different bodies and offices that are defined by single acts of parliament, and it changes incrementally and so on. So a theory of how the British Constitution works has to be grounded in very, very broad tendencies and traditions. And Bagehot was very elegant with this. What he said is that there's two branches of government. There's the dignified branch and the efficient branch. And the monarchy is part of the dignified branch, along with the Church of England, the aristocracy, and all of the instruments of the ceremonial procedures of state. And then there's the efficient branch, which is, this very chain of command legally constrained machine that's run by the prime minister and the civil service and parliament. And so he points out that, look, your monarch doesn't, can't boss around, the Home Affairs Department or whatever. Of course not. It's constitution. But if he stands up and he says, well, I think, everyone should move towards this or move against that, he shifts public opinion dramatically. And British monarchs for more than 100 years have been very cautious to use that power for anything that is contrary to the wishes of the political establishment. They tend to be very sort of copacetic. But King George V was bosom buddies with Emperor Hirohito. They had like matching dragon tattoos, and they were taught by the same Cambridge lecturer and all of this. And Emperor Hirohito goes back to Japan after studying in Cambridge, and he implements the lessons that he learned from Walter Bagehot, because he thought, well, how do I, live up to this enormous shadow of Emperor Meiji? The man who came up with the system for modernizing and industrializing countries that were well behind the West. This is the model that was used by Taiwan, Singapore, China under Deng Xiaoping. It comes from Meiji Japan. The basic principle is you do guided window financing, highly protectionist developmental economics, and suppression of organized labor. This is the sort of the three basic elements, and it's the same thing that Germany and the United States used. The fourth element being the recruitment of foreign expertise. So now this is how countries modernize. We know this is how they modernize because every major country that ever modernized and achieved real wealth and productivity has followed this model. There are no exceptions, and except for some micronations that became bloody tax havens. But this is not a lesson any normal country can learn from, right? And what Emperor Hirohito found is that if he stood up in public and said, the government should do A, B, and C, then the entire civil service and every ordinary person would scramble to achieve these ends with the most incredible fervor, that they would cause extraordinary problems in managing the excess, because they would try and outdo the targets that were sort of implied by public statements by the emperor, because he was seen as a living god. And so the weight of his command and his opinion was far exceeded that of the English monarchy, and he wasn't quite prepared for that. And I think, look, the Zulu monarch is somewhere in between. There are people who have a cultish following of the king, and there are people who don't like the king, and there's a whole division and spectrum surrounding this. But broadly speaking, even people who are kind of lukewarm on the monarchy, when push comes to shove, they believe that the monarch's opinion counts for something. They believe that it's important and that it is an office to be respected. He carries the spiritual weight of the entire Zulu nation. He's responsible for the inherited traditions that hold the nation together. And so when he says we need to get rid of these foreigners, you better believe some of them are going to stand up and do something about it. So that's a long way of saying, do not think for a moment that King Misuzulu is just a figurehead collecting a fat paycheck. He is someone whose opinion carries enormous weight in this country. And I mean, yeah, I mean, think about. Let's think about this. Sort of as a thought experiment. Imagine that tomorrow King Charles stood up and said, "All of this greeny bollocks needs to go, and mass migration needs to end. We need remigration today." I mean, do you really think that could be ignored? I mean, it doesn't matter what his qualifications are. The fact that he is the spiritual leader of the entire nation still carries weight, even in this weakened and modern sort of state that we're in. I think anyone can see that. it might not necessarily result in the prime minister immediately stepping to clicking his heels and expelling 15 to 20% of the population, but it would very dramatically shift the national dialogue.
So then, coming back to this place, then is what the elites that want to hold South Africa together. They obviously want to have more cheap migrants. They want to continue that going, but it's not in an interest of the Zulu nation to have it, right? So the kind of question I think about is, what are they going to try to do to prevent him? Because
what are they going to do to undermine the monarchy? You mean?
Yeah, because he could upset the apple cart.
Well, this is an ongoing struggle. So there's a lot of litigation going on to try and wrestle control of the Ingonyama Trust away from him. So that's the battleground that it's on, because the great power of the traditional authorities is that they have almost total control over the lands, the traditional lands they govern, more so than any municipality, and they're not subject to election. And they even have, because of the traditional legal system, have power of summons like a judge, and they can make rulings on criminal culpability. They have enormous authority, and so they could hypothetically leverage this to develop their areas and take the wind out of the central state's sails. But if the state goes against them too hard, there are buttons they can press, and things can get hairy very quickly. And no one likes that kind of divisiveness. People are terrified of it. So, especially in KwaZulu, they fought, 13 years of civil war to prevent division. The ANC on the side of black unity and the Zulus on the side of Zulu unity. And the only person who's been able to bridge that gap is Jacob Zuma, which makes, his age an enormous factor in deciding what's going to go on down there. So, that's open for speculation. And honestly, I'm not really equipped to give any kind of ruling or prediction on this. But I think what anyone can see is that something crazy is going to happen when he goes. So, yeah. This is the guy who got the IFP to disarm and the local ANC branches to disarm and everyone to go peacefully home at the end of the day in time for the 94 elections. He is the one who brokered the peace. And so, you can't discount him as an important figure. He is an enormously important figure in South African history, and no one recognizes him. I think in many ways, he's done more to make sure that the transition was peaceful than any other figure in that period. I think, de Klerk was riding a wave that had already sort of been kicked off in 1976 when Kissinger told Forster to initiate reform and started dismantling the color bar and blockading Rhodesia and things like that. And, P.W. Botha was already integrating municipalities so that you could share rates from white to black areas and removing the enforcement of the Group Areas Act and abolishing the miscegenation, the acts against miscegenation and so on. So by the time de Klerk came along, it's like, well, the momentum was already there. He was carrying out a plan that was already in front of him. Nothing particularly earth-shattering going on there. And, Nelson Mandela, well, the Soviet Union had gone. They had to bargain with the United States. They had to bargain with their own sort of financial situation. And they had to bargain with the fact that the NP still had control of the most powerful military on the continent. And so it was almost certain that it was going to cut the way it did, except for Zululand. And you can thank Jacob Zuma that, there aren't another 10,000 dead bodies lying around there. So, I think, he's an underrated figure.
No, sure, I would agree with you. I think that he had huge. I still think that he was. I think he was a better president than Mr. Ramaphosa. Um, I still think that Zuma was, even though he was involved with all sorts of scandal, he did less damage to South Africa, my opinion, than this guy. This guy has just been absolutely.
I don't know. Ramaphosa, this is bringing us to the national items. And
look, I'm not saying that like Zuma was an amazing president. I'm just comparing them.
No, I know where you're. I think everyone knows where you're coming from, David. I mean, it's but I think what's interesting to note is what role did the three major presidents play? Because Mandela was a figurehead. The guy running the show was Thabo Mbeki, right? So Mbeki is effectively president from 94 till 2007, and Jacob Zuma is effectively president from 2007 till what was it, 2018, and what I think Ramaphosa's role is he is there to hold the coalition together, because he doesn't have a very strong vision. He's not going to sort of pick a big faction and then crush everyone else and say my way or the highway. He doesn't have the weight to do that. Thabo Mbeki was riding the wave of Xhosa dominance in the ANC, and he used the security state to suppress his enemies and spread propaganda. And all of the things that are wrong with South Africa today, from BEE to the crippling of parliamentary oversight to the neutering of the public protector, and all of these things, right? Pretty much anything that is systemically wrong with South Africa, including Eskom, by the way, everything is his fault. There's nothing that is not Thabo Mbeki's fault. Jacob Zuma comes in on top of this and says, well, if you're stealing money, maybe I can steal a bit too. And he had the Zulu as his ethnic base, so he could command majority. And he commanded his majority rather than by coercion, secrecy, dirty tricks, although he did a lot of that too. He commanded dominance through patronage. What Ramaphosa is having to do is he's having to do it through dialogue, which is a very, very weak position. He cannot afford to offend any one of the people holding him up, because there's no one who can really quite replace him. If Paul Mashatile comes in, Paul Mashatile is going to have to reach out to the ANC and going to have to reach out to what remains of the EFF. Beg your pardon. I mean, we'll only really know what the fate of the EFF is in April, unfortunately, because Julius Malema bought himself an extra few months with, throwing a big riot and whatever the hell happened behind closed doors, who knows. It doesn't make sense to me at all that the judge postponed it. And she should have just, laid down his sentence and buggered off. But we're going to have to wait till April to see what happens. But regardless, whether he goes to jail or not, the EFF is up for taking, and they are, in the words of Helen Zille, a real constituency. And the MK is also a real constituency. And together, all of these branches, former branches of the ANC, occupy 2/3 of the General Assembly. And nobody in the DA and nobody in the donor class likes Paul Mashatile. There was a moment in which he was sort of starting to bridge the gap, but that boat has sailed. He is very, very firmly committed to an eastward pivot in South Africa's foreign relations. He is very committed, and he's actually gone against Ramaphosa's wishes. And early last year, made speeches. I think at the memorial for Chris Hani, if I remember correctly, he made a big speech about how he's going to invite MK and EFF to negotiations concerning a coalition. Now, this is very little remarked on by people in the mainstream media because you don't want to panic people, right? But that offer, I think, was genuine. And I think that an ANC reunion coalition is genuinely on the cards if he wins in 2027. Now, that brings us to the big ticket item that is on the thumbnail for this evening, which is Iran and the naval battle. Now, the point that I wanted to make, and this is one that it relies on trying to interpret what the events were. Because the little nitty-gritty details, there are many contradictions. Some, ANC Ramaphosa saying, "Oh, we told them 3 months ago. Oh, no, we told them yesterday. Oh, no, it doesn't matter." The basic thing is that there's two kind of conflicting interpretation of what's been going on. In one interpretation, you can say that what happened was they decided to see, screw it, we go along. These are our allies. We're going to test America's mettle and see how far we can go with this. And then at the end, they threw the generals under the bus, and they'll, use it to redistribute patronage when they let some of them go. So that's one interpretation. And the other one is that they ordered the military and Durko to, and through Durko, they tried to cancel this thing, and the generals wouldn't listen to them, and Iran wouldn't listen to them. Now, either way, it doesn't matter which way you look at it. There's a big, important section of the civil service, the armed civil service, who has now been thrown under the bus by Cyril Ramaphosa. And them sort of, whether they do it now or they did it before. Now, if it's that they've just been thrown under the bus reputationally and they didn't disobey, then they might very well sort of start skinnering and getting involved in the general talks about who should actually succeed Ramaphosa. So that's a risk, but that's just pure speculation. If, on the other hand, the story that the media is pushing at the moment is true, which is certainly a possibility. I mean, don't forget, just because it's propaganda doesn't mean it's not the truth. Specialists who actually know what they're talking about, like Darren Olivier, they have said that they have picked this story. So I think it should be given a good deal of credence. If it is the case that Cyril Ramaphosa gave instructions to the military to organize an orderly cancellation of Iran's participation in the naval drills and to go ahead without them, then what you're dealing with is that the top military brass are disobeying the president ahead of an ANC leadership election. And that indicates that there's a lack of confidence in his ability to continue governing. So if that's the case, and Darren Olivier is right, it means that Mashatile is very likely to become the new president of the ANC, and the ANC is very likely to form some kind of reunion, which means renegotiation with Zuma's allies in MK, an acceleration of the timeline for the National Democratic Revolution, and a reincorporation of a potentially headless EFF into the party structures, which will be an absolutely chaotic procedure. And like every other time they've had a realignment of structures, it will involve a bloodbath with dozens and dozens of people getting assassinated.
So sorry. Can I just interject there? My gut feel there's definitely a realignment happening. Which way it's going to realign, I don't know, and that could very well be true. But there's definitely some realignment happening, and it's not just happening there; it's also happening amongst minority communities. Many of us are, I would say me, but many people are realigning um, based on the absolute dismal performance of the DA. So I think there's realignments happening in many areas. It's not just there. I think it's also amongst minorities. Just
Yeah, no, that's true. I think as well. What are the issues though that will turn things around is economic performance. But when I look at this, I kind of get this mixed picture. So I had a look. There's been a lot of economic data that came out in the last week. So our inflation is now at very low point for the past 20 years, 3.6%. Now, I know because one of my lecturers, one of my stats lecturers at university, was on the team that used to put together the basket of goods for calculating CPI. They change it every couple of years. So it's not a one-to-one comparison. You know, tracking inflation in South Africa is a mug's game, and the numbers are cooked. So it's very hard to tell exactly how much. I mean, there's a guy who's got a bribery index, which I think is very cute. And actually not a bad idea. I think it's good to keep track, to keep your own basket of goods, and use that to keep track of inflation, because the headline inflation is, well, it's often revised. And so whether or not that data is really continuous is hard to tell. And the other thing is that there are sort of hidden factors in inflation, because like food inflation is like a whole percentage point higher than overall inflation, right? And you've also got housing inflation. Rental inflation in the past 5 years has gone up. The headline figure is 28%, and the Competition Commission sort of points to a 12% growth of the property market. But yeah, the thing is, the average rent is for the country has a 5% year-on-year growth at the moment, and the Western Cape, the average rent is nearly 12,000 rand. You know, even in the Free State. Now, the Free State's, you know, like a dismal place that it has always been, is at 7,000 rand a month. So, I mean, you're looking at a situation where the cost of living is growing in the same way as it is in the West, where you get this huge pressure from capital being dumped into the housing market to escape the low growth and high risk sort of nature of the rest of the economy. And all of our industry is being replaced by China. I mean, they we collected now, I think, 105 billion rands import tax from China, and this is a country whose strategies for circumventing, import duties is extraordinary. There's a lot of research that has been done into what they call trade misinvoicing, and China is everywhere in the world the worst culprit. Well, actually, that's not true. I think that Nigeria was the worst contender not so long ago. But they're very, very bad. I mean, you know, Shine and Temu, they actually rejigged their entire supply chains to break down all of their orders into individual import statements, so that they could circumvent the duties on commercial import. Like it's just so insane. The second that they actually sort of closed that loophole, they had many multi-kilometers traffic jams of standard unit trucks going up and down the major highway from Durban to Johannesburg, because it was just, you know, it created such an enormous supply chain shock. So, you know, China's role in this is enormous. And what they've done here is that they're buying out the Nissan's Rosslyn plant in Pretoria to Chery. So Chery is and there's all of these new Chinese cars on the road and everything. And so I sort of look at all of this and I go, there's a lot of things that are going wrong. And one of the ones that scares me just as much as the Chinese is Walmart. And I mean, you've got new articles now who are punting how great Walmart's sort of strategies are in South Africa. Their strategy is just loss leading pricing. Okay, here we go. We're going to take a whole bunch of items that we know that you need, and we're going to sell them at a loss until we eliminate all of the competition. And they have depth of capital that nobody on earth can compete with in the retail market. And so I guarantee you in 10 to 15 years, if nothing changes, Walmart is going to be dominant. I mean, you will struggle to find their competitors. It's they're going to take over, and as they take over, they have a process of targeting not just sort of competing retail outlets, but also competing small businesses, and they will deliberately undercut until every potential dimension of retail competition within driving distance of their locations is eliminated. And it's devastating because you tank the local economy, because all of that money that would go to local businesses, even if you're just talking about the nasty retail cartel that sits in South Africa right now, that money is at least staying in South Africa and it gets reinvested elsewhere. Walmart's money goes overseas. There's a little bit that's trapped here by BEE people, but I mean, like, sure, but I mean, where do you think their money goes? Dubai, Switzerland? So the thing about this is, like, your local businesses get destroyed by loss-leading practices. And what follows up from this is you delete the local economy, the money doesn't stay there, and gradually the buying power of the people around the Walmart goes down. And when their profit margins decrease to a low enough point, they just bugger off. But what they've done in the meantime is they've restructured the entire supply chain. So you get farmers or packaging plants or whatever now have to bargain with a monopoly, a local monopoly. And the local monopoly can dictate prices. So you now drive primary producers out of business that then get bought up by larger and larger cartels. So it's extremely pernicious. So having Walmart anywhere near your country is just like, it's a death knell. So they frighten the hell out of me. Everywhere you look, anytime anyone's done any kind of economic overview of their behavior in the United States, it's anytime a Walmart goes up, it's like a nuclear bomb hits the local economy. And when they do pack up and leave, there's nothing. And rebuilding takes generations and usually doesn't happen because of the kinds of state intervention that you get in liberal democracies, the sort of welfare dependent position, the highly regulated private markets, the privileged access for elite financial institutions and so on. So you get these sort of structural systems which prevent anyone from rebuilding after this kind of shit happens in the first place. And that's why half of America is stuck on fentanyl. But yeah, so I mean, back to cost of living. I mean, that's a long-term view, but I mean, my sort of issue with this, when you're talking about minorities voting DA.
Just wait, hold on, wait. Long-term view, would you say 50 years, 100 years? Are you still going to be alive?
10, 15. I'd say 10, 15. The damage will be visible. It's not immediate. It's like with Jordan Hill-Lewis in Cape Town. All of these things that he's doing about shoving tens of thousands of indigent people into rent-controlled apartments in high-density areas in order to combat spatial apartheid or whatever hell bullshit they cook up. I mean, look, they were pushing for densification without that justification. I mean, there's one particular case that gets on my that really gets on my nerves is Eersterivier, because that's just a profoundly unjust story. For years and years and years, it's like 2005 2005 or some nonsense like that. They've been trying to kick off these. They've been trying to kick these coloured subsistence farmers off a plot of land called Itemba Small Farms. And these people haven't got title deeds, but they are the successors to a farm that was abandoned by someone who fled the country in like 1990 or 1989. And they just, do pig farming and goat farming or whatever on that land. And the city decided they want to build like this massive housing complex there for 27,000 people. And so they've got to get these people evicted. And they got a court order in 2010 that forbade the city from doing anything of the kind. But the city still goes ahead and cuts off their water, goes around, bribes people, uses fraud to get someone who wasn't supported by the community to be their legal representative. They have a gentleman called Trevor Lodewijk who's involved in this mess, who's the head of security for UCT, but used to have an interest in the farming negotiations back then. And a lot of the residents accuse him of intimidation and all kinds of stuff. A lot of both city and provincial officials.
Dude, it's a total tangent, but do you know how many UCT? UCT is an interesting place because Newlands Stadium. It was like abandoned, and they've now moved the Newlands Rugby over to Sahara? No, it's not the Sahara Bowl. They've moved it through to Greenpoint. It's so interesting because so I have it on very good account that a particular UCT professor was involved with the potential selling off of Newlands Stadium. So it's just sitting there; it's not doing anything inside. If you go in there, there's just it's just overgrown. So people have been trying to sell it off, obviously to build, an apartment block or low-cost housing, who knows what. And I have it on very good account that there was someone that works at UCT, some person, some bigwig, was involved in trying to sell it. And he actually... he thought it was going to go through, so he moved to quite a snazzy area in Cape Town and bought a nice fancy house, and then the whole deal collapsed. And so he then got got this house in this fancy area, and the whole deal fell through. So it's just interesting.
Don't count your chickens before they've hatched. Generally, a good bit of advice.
But it seems like UCT people are involved in all sorts of interesting shenanigans in the city.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because you remember we talked about the urban upgrading program. It was UCT professors involved in generating that project with Helen Ziller and the German Development Bank. German Development Bank, they make a mint off of Cape Town. They do. Really, they do. 45 million euros a pop in profits from interest, like crazy stuff like that. But on the national calculus, my sort of look on this is there've been a few attempts by sort of the optimists. I mean, you can look at what's his name, Enthoven, who's representing the private the sort of private equity and investment side of Operation Vulindlela, which is that big sort of port and freight corridor upgrade program for Durban, Johannesburg. It's one of the biggest investment bonanzas we've had in living memory. And I mean, except for FIFA, of course. But, beg your pardon, shouldn't be drinking carbonated beverages on the stream. But no, all of them are saying, everything's turning around, everything's going great. And I sort of look at the figures and look, they're not we're not going through the floor. We're not Zimbabwe, But nothing's looking extremely lacquer either. I noticed someone pointed out that, we've sold more cars than any year since 2007. So I went and Googled, what's the working age population of South Africa in 2007 and what's it now? Because it's the number of cars sold is roughly the same. And it's we add 40% on top of the population, and we're not selling any more cars. So like the just like we're poorer than we were by quite a margin. And we're saying like, oh, everything's turning around. Like, jeepers, man! Like that's a bleak way of. That's like that's cold comfort. Very cold comfort. I mean, because the growth rates now are like, oh, we revised our projection from 1% to 1.1. That's the IMF the other day. I was like, well, if you know how GDP is calculated, it's like, well, it's nothing is actually capable of being that precise in that realm because there's so many little figures that are aggregated. I mean, I was given a very informative lecture on this by Russell Lamberti from Sarkelich, and I mean, he described how all of these things are calculated, and a lot of it is fudge. And so any change that is smaller than like a percentage point is something where you go, yeah, but does that really mean anything? You can kind of discount it. So growth rate 1%, yeah, that's it's not meaningful. We need to be at something like even the people in charge of rah optimism in South Africa saying we need 3% to really recover. And we're not getting it because we got electricity prices going through the roof. We decided, oh, okay, we're going to start turning it around, but now the price goes up so much that actually it's bankrupting all the industries that rely on it. So we're closing all the smelters.
And
we're closing all of.
Did you see what the municipalities are now going to be doing? They're now going to be able to just slap extra charges on people.
Yeah, correct.
To then just
we mentioned this. We mentioned this earlier in the stream. It was
it's penalizing.
Crazy.
The way I know this sounds exaggerated, but when you view it as anarcho-tyranny, it does give you a handle on it, where on one hand you have a group that can do what they want. They can invade land, they can throw plastic wherever, they can just do whatever they want. There's no maintaining of any order. It's just anarchy. It's just complete chaos. And then on the other hand, you've got the penalizing of the responsible citizens with rates, taxes. That's anarcho-tyranny. Now, it's maybe not full-blown anarcho-tyranny like in Venezuela, but that is what it is. It's a low-level anarcho-tyranny. And you see with this rate story, who do you think they're going to go after? Do you think they're going to go after the guy who's invaded the land and now has multiple dwellings on his land? They're not going after.
Well, you can't get blood from a stone.
They're going after
this is the thing.
Responsible people.
It's true, but it's also you can't get blood from a stone. So, if they wanted to really fix the problem and turn it around, they'd fix the problem and turn it around. But all of the fixes to all of the problems we have require pissing someone off. Let's say we decided tomorrow we're going to deal with all of the land invasions. We're going to send everyone back to where they came from, wherever the hell that is, whether it's up the road or on the other side of the country or on the other side of the Indian Ocean. Whatever, doesn't matter. Let's say you're going to send everyone home who stole land. You're now moving millions of people around. I mean, you look at the apartheid state. They had, during the course of the 20th century, they removed, I think, between 2 and 3 million people, something like that. Right? And now Israel doing this in Gaza is, it's like, big piles of dead bodies. Even when they do it in the West Bank, it's a pretty violent exercise. The apartheid state managed to do this while, I mean, I don't know how they managed to do this, but like the death toll from forced removals is actually remarkably low by the standard of what a forced removal, technically speaking, ethnic cleansing, actually entails. So it's like relatively low levels of violence for an ethnic cleansing policy. And which is what it was. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. So now we're looking at the present situation, and you're saying like, okay, well, now we're going to enforce law and order, and we're going to move on millions of people around. Can you imagine the logistics, the confrontation with NGOs, the confrontation with mobs, the violence, the tension in everybody? That's like, oh yeah, I mean, like I wanted law and order, but I don't really want to get my hands dirty or see anyone I'm associated with get their hands dirty or anything. I mean, look at the situation with ICE in Minnesota. You have a situation where an enormous immigrant community is found to almost entirely be composed of fraudulent enterprises. And the government says, okay, well, we got to step in and we got to deal with at least some of this. The minute they show up, it's just everyone says, no, everyone has a right to fraud. I mean, in Virginia, they were passing a law that literally made it illegal for state and federal government to check whether anyone was compliant with the requirements for receiving grants from the state. This is the kind of banana stuff that America's doing, because they're just, I mean, part of it's power play and everything, but the other side of the equation is that people actually just genuinely do not have the stomach for what it takes to reset order after you've let it go to waste. It's like if you get obese, right? Let's say you let yourself get to a 300-pound monster. Think about what kind of willpower and labor it's going to take to get yourself down to a like lean, mean fighting machine again. This is going to be pain. It's going to be oodles of pain. How many fat people do you know that have ever lost weight and gone back down without taking a Zempic, for example? Right? Now, try and imagine that kind of willpower within a nation state. What does that look like? Self-infliction of enormous amounts of pain in order to get yourself to normal. And it's not just the land invasions, it's welfare dependency, it's corruption, it's the list goes on. So I really don't know if we have what it takes, if the public has what it takes. You need someone who's got a really big pair of balls to do this.
Yeah, and you would. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that there's ways to do it slowly. I think there are a lot of strategic things you could do with regards to cutting off money, like using. Okay, so let's just think about this in a practical sense. What sort of leverage can you wield? Well, guns, weapons. That's a form of leverage. The second one is money. You know, what are those other, land resources? So if you start to slowly turn off certain taps, uh, things might. I mean, look, it's obviously a bit of a longer process, but I do think that, look, there's that old saying, I'm better trying something and failing than not trying at all. Now,
Quite.
we are in a state of greater and greater chaos, and somebody needs to do something. Someone with the balls, but I think with enough um, foresight, you could start to turn some taps off, turn some taps on, and you could start to use leverage. For example, okay, um, I think that Cape Town, the city of Cape Town, needs to be rezoned so that you have multiple municipalities formed, so that you don't have one big municipality. You've now got, perhaps, it gets broken up. You have the, you know, Durbanville and some of those northern suburbs would be one municipality. And so just by rezoning the city of Cape Town, you would bring accountability closer to people. And so now people there can start to deal with their problems in their area. So if you start to view this chaos and you try to rezone things and make things smaller so that people have handles on things, then I think, and then instead of having one totalitarian or one strong central system doing it all, you have these. You essentially allow people to start to solve their own problems by devolving powers to their levels through things such as rezoning of municipalities. That is one thing that I think, if I became the mayor of Cape Town, I would immediately start to push to rezone the city of Cape Town, and I would start to make things smaller.
What's going on?
And obviously, I would. Hey, Rob, I think.
Oh dear, David, you are roboting something terrible. I would say Just to elaborate on that point, while there's oh dear, poor guy's gone. What I would say over here in this regard is, look, I mean, this is a debate that's been had inside the Cape Independence movement about what kind of model of governance would, be best for the Cape. And because it really doesn't like serving indigents who are sort of simply parasitizing the state for free stuff, right? And one of the issues with this is that the humanitarian disaster that you visit on these people by depriving them of the teat of the state that they're so latched onto. I mean, you're going to see it. It's going to be very visible. There's going to be a lot of violent resistance. There's going to be a lot of problems. And one of the things that I was sort of sitting and thinking when I was discussing within the Vryheidsfront Plus was talking about how to go out breaking up, say, Tshwane, for example. And they're like the little mechanisms that you can use, but let's forget sort of all of that tangled nonsense, because it is a long shot and it's best, the details are best left for a different time. Hypothetically, let's say you can do it. You hedge off Pretoria, and it's like there's a little bit of Pretoria that looks like a little oven glove. And that is majority Afrikaans area, majority DA area, so on, right? And that little oven glove that surrounds the central district of Tshwane, that goes off and becomes its own highly efficient, very competent government with nice, clean streets and everything like that. But the other sort of 2.5 cities that comprise Tshwane, they're not going to be doing really well. They're going to be running a massive deficit and be unable to meet our basic services. And you've got a problem with people in the modern day is that this is not the 19th century where nobody's really dependent on the state for water, electricity, or garbage collection or anything. And so everyone's going to expect a certain standard of living. And if that gets taken away from them, they do not have the social infrastructure to replace it. Hypothetically, one could. And Solidarity and Orania and all of these things have gone a long way to showing that it can be done. You can actually do it yourself as a community. But you need to have a certain depth of capital. You need to have a certain organizational capacity. You need to have a certain intention and understanding and a deliberate aim, right? And if you suddenly rip away the state from people who are completely dependent on it, you are going to cause ructions of an enormous kind. So there's, within that discussion that I've had with people about breaking up these municipalities, one of the things that comes in is, well, you have to sit and find a way of sharing resources. So you control your own municipality, you're governed by your own people, it's nice and clean, it works very well, and all of that. And you don't have to worry about, a different demographic, dominating you in your local municipality, and so your government is secure. But if you don't share revenue from your municipality with the neighboring ones, they collapse and they move in. So there's this very sort of irritating paradox. And one of the things that we came up with when we were chatting about it in the Cape Independence movement was the idea of free municipalities. And this is basically that you sort of start with the government being a sort of centralized thing with devolved, well, not devolved, but sort of subsidiary departments that look after different districts, right? And the districts are very rationally composed and all of that. But then what you do is you create a legal mechanism that allows any local town or community, however defined, if they are capable of self-sufficiency, they can then apply for free city status or free municipality status. And by doing so, they gain the right to govern their own affairs to a large extent. What precisely that is remains to be seen, but at least control of land use and permitting and things like this, right? And the idea behind this is, I mean, let's take the Western Cape as it is today, and let's look at it this way. Let's take Drakensberg, because this is where I'm from, right? So you'll have Paarl will be governed as Paarl because Paarl can govern itself. Wellington will be governed as Wellington because Wellington the old Wellingtoners would be very, very happy to be free of Paarl. Because I mean that's a sort of old grumbling bitterness that goes back centuries. But the thing is that, Mbekweni and the surrounding agricultural areas would then be subject to the sort of nationally governed districts. That would be, so it's like really, by the way, so while we're here and John is not, I'm going to address a little question that someone's brought up here. So the problem with too much decentralization is that poor people move into the rich areas and then back to square one. No, untrue. That is only the case if you do not have law enforcement, which is the present state of affairs. And we've gotten so used to the permissive state of South Africa that we imagine that you can't actually enforce property laws. You can't actually kick squatters off. Like, you absolutely can. And if you want to talk about how easy it is, let's take the Dominican Republic. So the Dominican Republic deports 250,000 people a year. Now, their per capita income is higher than the Western Cape. So I think it's about twice as high. And what that means is the wages for civil servants and ordinary employees are commensurately higher. So the cost of deporting people is much higher. But they managed to deport 250,000 people every year to Haiti. These are people who squat on land, invade apartments, the whole 9 yards, all the same problems we have. But they are swept away like windy leaves off your stoep during August, and it goes on. And I think the thing is that the idea that you cannot do something about the problems of social disorder, it's just not true. The problem that you're going to have, and it raises a question about what decision and how you're going to cope with the situation. And there's never a situation where there's nothing you can do. There are always options. It's just, what is the cost you're willing to pay? So now the problem with Cape Independence is more or less that establishing law and order requires you to do things that make you look very mean. Right? You're going to have to do a lot of things that are going to make you look very, very mean. And so you have to sort of just realize that that's what it's going to involve. And the colored population are likely to be highly sympathetic to these things. But the white population are going to be a big load of crybabies about it. Because, we've always had a sort of comfortable place to lay our heads. And so if something uncomfy is happening that makes us look like a bunch of little meanies, then we're like, oh no, can you maybe just stop that? I mean, like, people who really deal with the brunt of this, the colored population, would like, yeah, good riddance, these people. Bye-bye. A lot of them would have that opinion, and you'd be surprised, right? You'd be surprised. But this is the tough thing, is dealing with white liberals, because white liberals have depth of capital, institutional influence, right? Media influence. The real threat to stability is white liberals preventing things from going on. Now, black populists are also a huge obstacle. Much more so in South Africa at large than in the Western Cape as a sort of imaginary separate entity. But it's not just these two on their own. It's the fact that they work together, and there are international forces that feed both. So this comment over here from this guy Johan Vihan is saying, nothing will solve anything. Everything is bad. Let's give up and cry. I sort of think, well, that doesn't really help us. And I think that if you're facing the dilemma, which says risky and unpopular thing, non-zero chance of success, don't disturb anyone or do anything difficult, but definitely end up in Zimbabwe. It was like a no-brainer, really. So, look, I think, okay, well, that's a fair comment. He says, I would probably estimate that the majority of white South Africans are white liberals. Yeah, I would reckon that is probably a fair assessment. how many of people are strongly sort of principled white liberals, or should I say true believing white liberals, and how many are just sort of people who go with the flow, whatever's going on? That's an empirical question that is yet to be tested. But I think your intuitions might be on the right track there. My sort of gut feeling with this, however, is look, I mean, it's not a gut feeling. My reasoned position, shall I say, is this: that however long shot all of these weird little sort of secessionist ideas are, and you can poke holes in their likelihood to come about, and there's little I could say to you. I know that the chances are not sort of massive unless something changes. 2027 might quite change that. I mean, we're looking at an emerging signal from the by-elections here in the Cape and in Pretoria, with the Vryheidsfront and the PA eating away at the DA, that ethnic populism, even amongst minorities, is going to eat away at the center. And if in 2027 you get Paul Mashatile instead of Cyril Ramaphosa, and I mean, there's this sort of dream floated like Patrice Motsepe is going to get in. I mean, he's going to have to bribe the hell out of everyone, and everyone is going to hate it, right? Including Patrice Motsepe. It's going to be extremely unpleasant for him. The likelihood is we're going to get Paul Mashatile. The likelihood is we're going to get, a situation where, again, it's a 50-50 whether we have an ANC reunion coalition and watch the country dissolve. The second that happens, you're going to watch a ton of people, including the ruling oligarchy, are going to say things like, maybe this Cape independence thing's not so bad, right? Because they're going to want to ring fence their capital. We're going to want to stabilize the SADC area against the risk of major economic collapse and spillover and whole 9 yards. So, yeah, I think it's not a non-zero thing. It's just that a lot of the factors that contribute to the success of either Afrikaner or Cape independence are a little bit outside of our control, for the simple reason that we do not have funding. Let's say somebody came to us in the Cape independence movement and gave us 5 million rand. In the grand scheme of things, that's not a huge amount. A lot of it would go to marketing, but some of it would go to supporting salaries for people who are otherwise tied up or, with various pursuits of income, or both. You've got a 2-income household at a very low level, and you got to look after kids and all of this kind of stuff. Interesting. Sorry, comment from this Johan Vian guy again, I think, which is also worth paying attention. He says, I think 2027, the DA being the largest party and winning Johannesburg will drive people back. No, see, that's circular logic. But okay, I see where you're coming from. But there is a begging the question aspect there. Because you have to ask yourself, is the DA actually surging to first position in the country? And the answer is no. Very clearly no. So something like watching their support collapse in an unprecedented fashion in a place that they've never lost, like in Pretoria up there, that is an unprecedented signal. Now, you can talk about Gareth van Onselen and his polls, and I don't want to knock him. His polls tend to be accurate up to a point. But we do not have a lot of years to look at data for how people signal their voting intention a year out from an election. We only have 1 year to really look at where it's publicly available. And that's for the last election. Well, what happened in the last election? A year out from the election, we had the DA polling at 33% nationally. Everyone's getting like tears in their eyes, imagining a new Mandela moment where, white people are finally accepted by Black South Africa and all of this. Come down to the election, the DA get 4% of the black vote and stay static at 21%. Now, I fully expect that the difference between the poll sampling and the exit polls is going to narrow, because we've seen this before. We've seen this before. And look, Frans Cronje has been in this business a very long time. And he's looked at these inter-electoral polls many times before, things that don't get published all the time because political parties keep track of the support. And it is a fact that the DA have a very high score between elections, but never ever change their result at the actual election. Now, personally, I think that the turnout for Helen Zille is going to be high. I think she's going to do very, very well. I genuinely believe that she's going to do well. I'm not going to knock her for that. My problem is that I do not think that she is going to turn around Johannesburg. Johannesburg is really, really screwed. It's not Cape Town. Cape Town had a bit of a debt problem and a couple of local areas that had maintenance backlogs. This is an absolute irreconcilable catastrophe. And not only that, but she has stated over and over again and shown in practice that her policy is never to disturb ANC cadres in their seats in the civil service. It has happened everywhere they've governed. You never ever displace the ANC. You invite them into your house. They've done it everywhere. Garden Route, Nelson Mandela Bay, Tshwane, Johannesburg. It doesn't matter where you look. The same things happen over and over again. They do not disturb the patronage networks, ever. And the consequences of this is that governance does not improve in quality. It may become stable because you've got accountants looking after the books and making sure at least we know where the money is, even if we aren't always spending it appropriately. Okay, so at least we know money's being spent. We can call up that department. We can say, hang on, have you fixed that problem? Have you spent the money? Okay, you've spent the money. Cool. Does it have a receipt? Okay, cool. It has a receipt. We'll work something out, right? So things kind of get on rolling and they get going, right? It's not miracle work, but it keeps things above board. The problem with this is that it doesn't enable you to fix deep, lasting problems at the fundamental level. You're going to see the same patronage networks in place. You're going to see sabotage. You're going to see union protests. You're going to see all kinds of things. And regardless of how well she does in Johannesburg, I think it's almost certain that she's going to have to go into power in a coalition. I don't think anyone's unrealistic enough to think the DA is going to secure 50% plus in Johannesburg. That's just not realistic. It's not impossible for them to get the biggest position in the council, but it is impossible for them to get over 50%. I'm pretty confident about that. And so what we can expect is the DA going from the same things that happened to them when they were in charge of Nelson Mandela Bay. They were the biggest party there. They had 46%, the ANC's 39%. But they didn't. See, here's the thing. Black people vote for the DA only at a rate of 4%. Johannesburg is the most sort of liberal and tolerant black population in South Africa. They have, in their peak, I think 15% voted for the DA, right? That's back in 2016. So now, the DA can govern. They can get significant black votes up there, right? Helen Zille picked a great place to do it, to try and prove her point, right? Excellent choice, really good. The city that needs the most fixing, grand. But they couldn't fix Nelson Mandela Bay. Why not? Well, because there are evergreen contracts that can be endlessly tweaked. And the second that she goes after these people, there's going to be hell to pay. Does she have what it takes? I don't know. Let's wait and see. But I strongly suspect that she is not going to have the miracle response that is required. What happened when the DA failed to produce miracle results wherever they governed? Now, they didn't produce a catastrophe. They didn't make governance worse. Okay? We know this. They're fairly competent people. But black people who moved over to the other side of the aisle, that little margin that said, okay, let's give them a chance. Those people were expecting noticeable changes in their lives, and they didn't see that. And the standard for this is very, very high because of the level of distrust from intergenerational issues. And the younger generation are a lot more radicalized than the older ones. And even in the DA, you've seen leftward shift over the years, right? So what is the problem here? The problem is that unless Helen Zille delivers a miracle, the general perception in the public will be that she governed only for white people, she didn't fix the problem, and the DA are only as good as the ANC. This is the risk that she takes. And if her career ends that way, that's tickets. Because the DA does not have a challenger that is as intelligent and ruthless as she is. She is the most talented person in that party, the most talented person they've had for a very, very long time. Incredible. I'm talking generations. She's a generational talent. So who are they going to replace her with? Jordan Hill-Lewis? Yeah. Okay. He's bright. He's hardworking. He's circumspect. But he doesn't cut the mustard. And there's no way that South Africans are going to vote for him for president. Because they'll all say, like, oh, what did you do to Cape Town? Because by the time that he's running for national leadership, the cracks will be beginning to show in Cape Town, and people will be able to point to policy decisions that he made. And during his governance, what was Cape Town like? Everyone agreed it was governed for the interests of white people. You know, the majority will see it that way. So now that's an interesting question. Is the VF actually radical? Corné Mulder, I believe, has a radical streak in him. He's the one who agreed to put Cape Independence on the ticket for the party. My understanding is that he has to deal with factions up north, and I do not like those northern factions. There are two characters there. One of them, whom I will name, for this is the former leader, Peter Groenewald. I don't like him at all. I don't think there's anyone who likes him. I don't think anyone who's ever met him has liked him. He is, by all accounts, an extremely unpleasant person. There are people who were thinking of prominent people who were thinking of joining the party, who joined the DA instead, simply because they found him so unpleasant in person. And it's not just that. He got rid of Johan van Schalkwyk, who is one of their most talented and promising and serious anti-corruption sort of fighters in the party. The Cape branch is fantastic for this, right? The Cape branch of the party has always been great at combating DA corruption and holding them to account. But he punished Ron van Schalkwyk by pushing him out of the party so that he could patch up disagreements he was having with the DA leadership at the national level. So this is the story anyway. I cannot confirm. I must underline this. Cannot confirm. Right? So this is the kind of thing that I see from that side. And in order to get an unopposed leadership position in the party, you have to strike agreements with your potential opposition. So Corné Mulder has had to play realpolitik with the northern branches in order to secure the leadership. The consequences are that they kind of have to protect the position that the party's in order to stay in the center. Part of my concern is that the party, that Corné Mulder might also be of the opinion that the GNU is a good thing to be in. I'm not so sure I'm all that confident of that, because it puts them in a position, if they think that they might be reticent to push their radical edge. Now, the problem with VF Plus is that they are sort of very droog, shall I say. I know them quite well. They're very buttoned down people who are very civilized and very well behaved, and they may have sort of radical aspirations, but they are not rabble rousers or rioters or anything of the kind. They're very sort of straight up and down. They don't do nasty, insane things. They're not the EFF. And so it's difficult to read exactly what their potential is. One of the things that constrains them is that they're a very bureaucratic party. And so they're very procedure-orientated, very slow-moving. And while that's kept them from scandal and has kept them from a lot of problems that you see in the DA and certainly in the ANC, it makes it difficult to move. It makes it difficult to pivot. It makes it difficult to be agile. Now, that can cut both ways, because if the leverage is on the side of, okay, pushing independence, pushing autonomy, there are initiatives put on the table, things are done, then they'll be carried by that momentum and they won't be able to back out. And if the leadership tries to push against the momentum, they'll be in trouble. But it can also go the other way. If there's a failure to lobby for these positions, if there's a failure to move for these positions inside and from outside, it won't go that way. And so the thing with the Vryheidsfront+ is that they're not, how should I put it? They are not in a position to be called decisively for one sort of direction or the other at this point. They do offer a positive check on DA behavior, though. That is my perception. Having watched a lot of the feuds they've gone through in the Western Cape, they are, regardless of any other position, they are at least that. Trying to see it, trying to look at it in the right, in a sort of reasonable light here, because it's difficult. I don't want to bash them too much, because I like them and I think they're the rational choice to vote for if you're a minority in South Africa. I don't think that there's any other party that is a stronger call for them. But at the same time, when I'm sitting here in the Cape and my priority is sort of, how do you leverage for Cape independence? I think, well, do I want the Vryheidsfront+ or do I want the Referendum Party or the CIP? And it's, well, like, I'm living outside of the city, so Cape Independence Party is very much a city thing, whereas the Referendum Party is more in the sort of, Winelands, Overberg, West Coast, Garden Route, and so on. So Referendum Party is more of the hinterlands and so on and so on. It's like, the division between the the PA and the NCC. NCC rules the city bowl. PA handles the outside municipalities. And my sort of trick with this is I sort of think, well, should I lean on the more sort of strict Cape Independence parties to put pressure on the Vryheidsfront+? And now it's the tail wagging the tail, wagging the tail, wagging the dog. But no, the Referendum Party hasn't died, but they are very short-handed for staff. I mean, like, everyone wants to vote, nobody wants to volunteer. It's a hard one, because they've got no sort of big money elite backing. So this presents a sort of bottleneck. But on that note, I'm going to close this little session, and I think, let me see if there's any sort of news items that I missed. Oh, there is one. Just for a little bookmark. Yesterday, ANC's Greater Johannesburg conference. It was a huge vote rigging scandal. Police were called, all of that. I think this is probably the biggest thing that you should be keeping your eye on. How does this particular crisis shake out? Now, it's only been 24 hours. So it's too soon to tell exactly who is going to win what contest of legitimacy or authority or strength within Johannesburg and so on. But it has big consequences because of Helen Zille. Because she's running for Johannesburg, the big question will be, will Panyaza Lesufi be a force for sabotage, or will a different faction take over and facilitate the DA's rise in Johannesburg, thereby providing legitimacy to the liberal wing of the National Coalition? If it cuts the wrong way and Lesufi gets in charge, we're going to see sabotage in Johannesburg. Helen Zille will have a hell of a time trying to get anything done. Right? It'll be like Nelson Mandela Bay all over again. And nothing will last. And in 2029, yeah, the DA is toast. Now, I say that is bad because the Cape would benefit from the DA collapsing. The Cape would massively benefit from the DA collapsing, because there's no way the DA would ever collapse enough that a governing coalition couldn't be pulled together. Because ANC plus EFF is 25%. There are parties that they can do deals with, and it would create a very, very interesting dynamic in provincial governance and potentially result in a referendum for us. On the other hand, there's the rest of the country to consider. If you are in Johannesburg, you want Helen Zille to succeed, because that gives a stable mandate for them to continue running things and to grow in the municipalities and so on. If you're in Pretoria, it's different, because now people are going to stop looking to the electoral system and they start looking more to Solidarity. And then Solidarity will now come under pressure to do more and more radical things to secure control over territory and capital and people, and demonstrate that they can tell the state where to get off when they overstep their mark. So it's very, very complicated, but people living in Johannesburg are going to really, really suffer, because there's no alternative for them if the DA collapses. They don't really have anyone else. There's not enough of an Afrikaner sort of presence there to give the Vryheidsfront Plus any kind of in. It's just the DA and then an ocean of Mugus. Right? That's it. So if you are in Johannesburg, the one thing that you want to be keeping your eye on would actually be the fallout from the ANC's regional election going on over there. And because it's only been a day, no one knows how it's going to shake out. But, it's ballot stuffing, bribes, the whole 9 yards. Just, because it's an ANC election, it's not quite the same. And so people are going to keep their claws in and so on. They're going to keep their claws sheathed. But when push comes to shove, behind closed doors, not out in, the public with, prosecution and police and so on, there are going to be a lot of deals being struck. There are going to be a lot of handshakes and fist fights behind closed doors that you are going to have to keep your ear out for knowing which way this is going to shake out. Because if Panyaza Lesufi's faction maintains control going into the next year, Helen Zille, even if she wins a big slice of this, is just not going to win the contest of fixing Johannesburg. That is what I believe. She stands a sliver of a chance if Panyaza's guys get defeated. That's where it comes down to. It's not even in her hands. It's in the ANC's hands. If a faction comes in who's willing to give up control of their future to the DA, then we got Johannesburg in the back. Yeah, that's a big question. So, is it going to be Johannesburg who wins, or is it going to be everyone else who wins? It's like, it's awful. It's awful. It's awful. We're in an awful position because of decisions made in 1994, 1976, 1936, 1922, 1865. Hell's bells, We're here because of strategic positions taken back in the 1860s. So, you can push it back as much as you like, but it's sort of like, well, we are where we are, and there's a lot of weird stuff that we're going to have to deal with. And unfortunately, not everyone shares the same interest in the same outcomes. And a lot of us are going to sit and resent each other for this, I think. And what I desperately hope every day is that those of us who have different interests in political outcomes can find a way not to hate each other for this. I think one of the things, and this is one of the things I just keep trying to hammer home for everyone when I speak, is, and I forget to state it explicitly, but it's this. And people always talk about, oh, why can't we just get on? And like, this is the right. You've got it backwards. Everyone can get on. If you're a white guy, even if you're like a hard right conservative, if you want to, you can find a way of getting on with members of the EFF. This is actually not a problem. Interpersonal relations, you just have some basic social skills, you be nice, you get on with life, right? Anyone can actually interface with anyone unless they are very particularly full of nonsense, right? As an individual. It's how individual characteristics and cultural characteristics and values and prejudices and memories and things get translated into political behavior. That is where things divorce. And you're going to have to find a way, whoever you are, of not being like some hysterical flipping leftist and being able to say, well, look, man, you're a human being and all that, and we can get along just fine. But my political interest is here. It would be very foolish of me not to do what is in my interest. Okay. Extremely foolish. So I'm going to do what's in my interest. And you've got to find a way of sort of having Marcus of Queensbury rules for life and politics as intersections, because the reverse is certainly true. Sure, you have diverging interests, but you are going to have to find a way to get on with these people because you live with them. And the big problem with a lot of people is that they feel their political positions as moral or spiritual ones, which they are. Even if they are, it doesn't that it's not healthy for you, and it's not healthy for people around you, for you to make the political personal, unless it has to be. And there are not a lot of cases where the personal is truly political, except in mob scenarios, which, get out of those as often, get away from those if you ever can. But on that note, I'm going to end this. Thanks for tuning in. And as as triggered as I am when people like Johan Vian come up with, Cape Independence won't work and all that kind of stuff, which, I have to be honest, it does get under my skin a little bit because I know the chances are so slim. And so, yeah, it generally does sort of give me like, damn, I know, right? But that's not my argument here. My argument is this is the right way to go. This is a thing that's going to give us a meaningful future where the trajectory is not sort of managed descent, but like an actual change, right? And so I look at this and I go, okay, this is where it has to go. This is what people have to back if they want there to be a future in this part of the world, not just for us silly minorities sort of braaiing on the weekends, right? Okay. So this is just generally the perspective. So because I mean, here's the thing, and the thing that you mentioned down there, Mr. Vihan, about Joburg being an enclave city, people don't rely on the municipality anymore. That may be true, but the municipalities rely on you. And so you're going to be squeezed more and more. And there will come a point at which people are not interested. And I think when you have to ask yourself, well, what does a state like South Africa do where you've got mass black populism? Oh, no, don't apologize for getting under my skin at all. No, it's like, dude, it's entirely my fault for letting that get to me. It's an honest question. Relax. But the problem with the private sector is anything that is corporate is bound by law. You will not see a corporation in South Africa break the law no matter how weak enforcement is. Look at employment equity. The entire Department of Labor's budget for the enforcement of of employment equity is, I think, 1.5 million rand. That's enough to that's not even enough to hire 5 civil servants for the year. So You're looking at that kind of bottleneck for enforcement. And despite the lack of sort of direct enforcement, everyone complies. Everyone complies. If you rely on your estates, this is the next target of BEE. What happens when BEE takes over your estates? Well, we've all seen it: looting, fraud, negligence. What happens when cadre deployment is affecting your gated estate? All right. It means that the number of estates that are untouched by decay start shrinking. And what happens when the state's ability to keep order in the municipalities and provide patronage and so on starts ebbing because people are just no longer paying their rates or whatever, right? Well, if you cannot get revenue from the public, if you cannot get revenue from taxes, there are two other ways you can get revenue. You can print the money or you can borrow it. We're at our limit with borrowing. We haven't tried printing our way out. There's been a little bit of quantitative easing in the past, but we've stopped that because it's risky. But soon enough, that temptation will come back and people are going to start printing money. When you get to double-digit inflation, then people start panicking. When they start panicking, they start leaving. When they start leaving, the government realizes it's only a matter of time before they run out of resources, and so they start grabbing properties. Even in the West, you're starting to see moves towards trying to expropriate people's property by stealth. Look at the farm tax that they did in the United Kingdom, trying to pass, increased inheritance tax and things like this. This is how governments operate. If you're going into decline and everything's squishy and every lever you pull on, the gears are stripped, right? Then there's a point at which you come in there with a hammer and you smash everything up. Because, well, you need something you can control. And like, I don't think South Africa is going to, all collapse in one fell swoop. But what I'm saying is there's a limited amount of levers that the government can pull on because the gears are stripping and the power is getting weaker. But when you get to a certain point, expropriation is actually your option. There's a reason they're preparing for it. There's a reason that they're tightening the noose and testing the limits. Under Cyril Ramaphosa, not under Jacob Zuma, under Cyril Ramaphosa. Why is it Ramaphosa who's doing it? Because even the most moderate branch of the ANC recognizes that this is their raison d'etre. And they are the most moderate part of the Black Caucus in the parliament, 2/3 of the parliament. So, I think it needs to be borne in mind that the private sector is not a long-term solution. There is no element of the private sector that has enough common feeling that it is spontaneously going to abandon its profit risk analysis and engage in whatever. What happens when profit-seeking businesses face any kind of risk? They pack their bags and they take their capital away. Then you are left holding the bag because you thought that they were your buddies. They're not. They're a business partner. You are a client. That's it. And it's great because it mitigates adverse effects in a low-risk environment when they're not actually facing any kind of existential threat. But the second those threats start to pinch, 10 years' time, they're going to evaporate. The real long-term solutions will come from ethnic enclaves. That's where it's at. And if you do not bury yourself in an ethnic patronage network, some way or form, you are done for. And there's a reason that I look at Solidarity and AfriForum and I try and encourage them to push for, more and more rapid and ambitious programs, right? And that's because they give you the one opportunity in South Africa as a white person to pursue both ethnic self-interest and rule of law without hurting anyone else. Those are three characteristics that are just, can you imagine that in any context in the world where you can say, I'm going to have rule of law, I'm going to look after my ethnic self-interest, and I'm not going to hurt anyone as things are going to shit. I mean, it is the morally right position to take, is to give people that option, right? Because if you can shore up enough of the white middle class and give them a long-term protection, not just enough to last out the final cycle of South Africa's state political economy, but to outlast it. If you can guarantee that, then you can guarantee the recovery of South Africa as a whole and the reimagining of the entire state system through the ability to bargain with the center with veto power. I think, people need to understand what that means. At any rate, I think I really do need to stop now. Oh yeah, now Anglos need to. Well, fuck, I'm an Anglo. Solution for Anglos is to get your act together and realize what you are and where you are. There is no solution for you that is legally defensible. You are going to have to ride on the coattails of the Afrikaners and of the Cape and of the Zulu nation, whatever the case may be, until such a time as the ability of the state to enforce the laws against racial discrimination offer you the ability to create an ethnic enclave. That's your only. If you want to do it as Anglos, as opposed to in coalition with some other ethnic group, you're going to have to wait until there's a situation where this. Because think about it this way: if you organize anything that says, we are English, everyone speaks English. What is to prevent anyone from joining your organization, whatever their persuasion? And again, what proportion of the educated English population are left-leaning? You are going to have an impossible problem with entryism, which Afrikaans conservatism does not face. If you understand the Solidarity movement and you understand their background, they are not actually right-wing. They are very centrist liberals. Some of their most influential leaders are people who've written extensively on why redress is even good. They are very, very dead centrist. They're just very pragmatic and not retarded. English people are retarded, and I say this with my full chest. We are fucking stupid. Because we think that we are part of this global human race, this continuum. No, we are equivalent to Rhodesians who've been given an excess lease on life, right? And we forget that our entire lease on life is entirely dependent on the bulk of the numbers backing up the minority, the sort of minority world is coloreds, Indians, and Afrikaners, right? We forget that we're dependent on them for things actually going okay. Entirely dependent on them. The idea that we can make it in this country without them is bananas, right? And we have to face the fact that we are contingent on their success. We are even contingent on Zulu success, because that is the one place that at scale, English South Africans will be have a chance of being treated respectfully as a partner in the nation. Because look, okay, the Zulu King says, let's get rid of Natal in the name. It's KwaZulu now. Whatever. Take that as it may. But, an Englishman who learns the protocols and gets on with life, like, G.G. Alcock, G.G. Alcock, I mean, he gilds the lily a bit and says, he's a white Zulu. Well, sort of, but he's still an Anglo. I mean, his parents married each other and they're white, and he married a white woman and so on. And they continue to be Anglos with this sort of secondary ethnic light culture that they conform to as a minority. Right? So Zulu becomes the light culture and you participate and everyone accepts you. Right? And that's the thing about the Zulus, is that they don't, as long as you behave like that, they're not going to second guess your dominant position. The rest of the country is not the same, especially not urban radicals. And that race thing is never going to go away. And so, I don't know. I think because let's say with the difference between South Africa and KwaZulu is KwaZulu has an ethnicity and a culture as their leading feature. South Africa has race. That is how you become South African, is you be black. The problem with English South Africans is that we were what it meant to be South African. We defined it. We were it. Okay, we defined it in the Cape and we spread it to the rest of the country, and that was the deciding factor. Is English South Africans were the quantity that was South African, right? And everyone else was just dragged into this whole silly thing. And it's like it's much like the British Empire at large. British Empire is this tiny. The Great Britain, England itself, is this tiny speck amongst a giant ocean of humanity. But the success of the British Empire is such that every single person is completely awash with the culture of England. Who doesn't play football in the world? Who doesn't have a parliamentary democracy? You know, who doesn't in some way embrace some element of the rule of law? You know, all of this stuff. Even the French Revolution is downstream of imitation of the English. So there's nothing left in the English they can call their own that's different from everyone else. Everyone wears suits, for crying out loud, right? The normal dress suit that people wear to work is the traditional English cultural costume. That's what it is. We forget that. And the same is happening to America with their blue jeans and their sneakers and their what have yous, right? You get such a success that the things that define you as a culture become so omnipresent that you can no longer define who you are by it anymore. What do English South Africans have? Any cultural artifact that we have that the rest of South Africa does not to some degree adopt, whether it's language or dress or, you know, food culture or anything. All of the things that make us what we are as a separate ethnicity, right, are intangible. And so any attempt by any of us to form some kind of organization that says we are English South Africans and we this, that, and the other is going to run up against the brute fact that any ability to gatekeep what we are is going to exclude half of our own population, right, because of political differences, and it's going to exclude, and it's going to be impossible to exclude people who are not members for the simple reason that when we offer sort of common sense, sort of conservative, liberal, free market, blah, 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 there's going to be 1,000,001 people who want to join that who are not English. And the second the debate about what this thing is concerned emerges, the ethnic component disappears and it becomes a liberal party. And we already have one of those, and it's too late for them to do anything. So if you want to fix the problem as an Anglo, your options are basically become a white nationalist or piggyback on some other ethnic group's thing. And being a white nationalist is bloody stupid in South Africa because it just doesn't work. It paints a target on your back. Everyone considers you an asshole. And there's just no point in it. Okay. So the realistic options are all piggybacking on other ethnicities' self-determination programs and preserving what you can preserve. Love what you can in your own culture. But it's, you know, the English tradition, English culture it's richer than any besides perhaps Catholicism and China, you know, but that's it. You know, it lives in memory. It lives in pages, and the traditions are thin. The rites are thin. The customs and ceremonies are thin. They're dying out and they're being squished to death in their own home turf. And so if you want to be something different from the rest of South Africa, you've got to reckon with what that cost is, because I think it's either going to cost you an enormous amount of patience or it's going to cost you a lot of risk and bloodshed and alienation and just stupid pain for everyone concerned. And so I would strongly insist that if anyone starts to have a dream about sort of some kind of Anglo enclave in South Africa, that they must understand very, very clearly what that entails and what kind of battles you will have in the courts and what kind of, how would I put it? You know, I mean, because think about it, you don't even have, or what are you going to go with? The Anglican Church? Most Anglicans are Zulu. Are you going to go with Methodists? Most Methodists are what? Xhosa and Sotho, I think. And so it's like there's not even a religion you can point to because, again, most English South Africans are atheists. There's just nothing there that you can hang your hat on. It's not there. So Afrikaners have it. They have rebel capacity. The Zulus have it. They have rebel capacity. The Cape, as an idea, has it. It has rebel capacity. But all of these are latent until someone decides, okay, this is what we mean, and we're going to move in that direction until we get it. But if no one makes that decision and no one moves, terminal decline, do not pass go, do not collect $200. You are joining the rest of Africa in the slow descent. I mean, like, Africa's growing, but, you know, it's precarious, should we say. It's precarious. It's very precarious growth. No one knows how it's going to end up. Africa could end up wonderfully, or it could end up very terribly. And it's too soon to tell. But anyway, I would say, you know, support whatever centrifugal forces you can. Good night.